In Japanese, there's a clear distinction between two types of speech: polite speech, keigo, and plain or casual speech, often called tomodachi kotoba or tameguchi. Keigo is a style of speech used towards people you need to treat with respect, such as teachers, bosses, customers, strangers, older people, or people you are not close to. But even within keigo, there are different levels of politeness. 田中さん、これを見てください is polite, but it's not as polite as 田中様、こちらをご覧ください. And people often have this question: when and with whom should I use keigo? And when can I use casual form? You might know that you should speak to your teachers in keigo. But what about classmates who are older than you? Or coworkers who are around the same age? So in this video, I'll break down how the Japanese honorific system works. So first, what is keigo? Keigo is a particular style of speech that the speaker uses to show respect to the person they're speaking to. In Japanese, one of the main ways you do this is by ending the sentence in a particular way. In other words, the difference between polite speech and casual speech is often whether the sentence has a polite ending or not. Desu and masu are both polite endings. So if a sentence ends with them, it is considered polite speech. これはペン is not a polite speech because it does not have the polite ending. But if I say これはペンです, it's a polite sentence, polite speech, because it has the polite ending です. But this is not the only polite ending. でございます is another polite ending, and it is even more polite than です。これはペンでございます。ありがとう is casual because it does not have a polite ending. But ありがとうございます is polite because it has the polite ending ございます。Also, some words are considered polite, while others are considered casual. こんにちは itself is considered polite, so you do not need to add anything to it. Saying はい is polite, while saying is casual. I said that keigo is a particular style of speech that the speaker uses to show respect to the person they're speaking to. But this is actually a very simplified definition. In order to really grasp the system of keigo in Japan, you need to understand how Japanese people perceive social order and hierarchy. Keigo is, in a way, a sign which shows that you're aware of your social position in relation to the person you're speaking to. In other words, fundamentally, if I speak to you in keigo, it shows that I am aware that you are above me. You're greater than me. My 3-year-old son, Hayate, does not speak in keigo because he does not know anything about society yet. In his eyes, there's no real awareness of social relationships. The emperor of Japan would look exactly the same as any older man in the neighborhood. But once children reach a certain age, they start to become aware of social positions. That's when they start using keigo. This often happens sometime during elementary school. School is an environment that strictly divides kids into school years, so kids naturally become aware of the order by age. I belong to the 2nd year, he belongs to the 3rd. So he is my senior. He is higher in the hierarchy. Once kids become aware of the social order, they not only start speaking politely to their seniors, but they also start getting offended when younger kids speak to them casually. The older they get, the clearer the hierarchy becomes. By the time they enter junior high school, most kids are made aware of their place because they know they might get punished if they ignored it. What matters is not age itself, but which school year someone belongs to. Even if two kids are both 13, if one is in the first year and the other in the second year, the first year student is expected to use polite form when speaking to the second year student. So in Japan, when a kid doesn't know how old is another kid, they often start the conversation by asking which year they belong to. 何年生ですか？ああ、僕は中2です。あ、そうなんだ。俺中3、1個下だね。君、緑中でしょ？あ、はい、そうです。あ、じゃあ、緑中だったら、生麦ライスって知ってる？野球部のやつなんだけど、あいつ俺の友達なんだよね。あ、はい、知ってます。So once this guy confirms that he is 1 year older, he starts speaking casually because he is the senpai. Meanwhile, the other guy keeps using polite speech because he is the kohai. Of course, there are also namaikina gaki, cheeky little brats, who dare to speak casually to older kids. But kids like that often get punished for it. ねえ、野球のメンバー足りないからさ、一緒にやろう。お前誰に口聞いてんだよ。お前2年だろ？俺3年だぞ。いいだろ別に、固いこと言うなって。お前、俺のこと舐めてるだろ。そんな汚え顔舐めるかよ。お前ちょっと裏に来い。礼儀教えてやる。This conflict might not have happened if the younger one had used polite speech. So instead of saying, ねえ、野球のメンバー足りないからさ、一緒にやろう。He was supposed to say, 野球のメンバーが足りないんで、もしよかったら一緒にやりませんか？ In school, the hierarchy is relatively clear because it is basically determined by school year. But once you enter the adult world, things becomes more complicated. In adult society, age is only one factor. You also have things like job position, social role, the situation, and the relationship between you and the person you're speaking to. Things can get awkward when the boss is younger than the subordinate. If they meet in private, the younger person would normally be expected to use polite speech towards the older person. But in a work environment, the younger person may be higher in position, so the older subordinate is expected to use polite speech, while the younger boss may use casual speech. In this kind of situation, whether the younger boss actually uses casual speech depends on their personality. Some people can easily switch roles once they enter the workplace, so they can speak casually even to someone much older than them. But some people just cannot bring themselves to speak casually to an older person, so they continue to use polite form no matter who they're speaking to. Let's say Sasaki and Murakami are co-workers in the same position, but Murakami is older than Sasaki, so Sasaki speaks politely while Murakami speaks casually. 村上さん、企画書できたんで、デスクに置いておきますね。お、わかった。ありがとう。But then, Sasaki gets promoted to Kacho, section chief, while Murakami remains a hirashain, a regular employee. So now, the younger person, Sasaki, is Murakami's boss. 村上さん、昨日頼んだ企画書できた？すいません。あとちょっとです。俺、もう少しで出かけなきゃいけないから、できるだけ早く頼むね。はい、わかりました。So now, Sasaki speaks casually while Murakami speaks politely. One thing you should note here is that even though Sasaki speaks in casual form to Murasaki, he still uses honorific suffix san, Murakami-san. This is because yobiste, calling someone by their name without honorific, is considered very rude in adult society, especially when calling someone older than yourself. So even when in terms of job position, you're superior than the other, unless you have a very clear hierarchical relationship with the person, you wouldn't yobiste, call them without honorifics. Now, Sasaki speaks casually to Murakami at work, but if they meet in private, Sasaki would probably speak politely to Murakami again because outside the work environment, he is no longer superior to Murakami. あら、村上さんじゃないですか。こんなところで何やってるんですか？ああ、今これから家族で水族館に行くんですよ。あ、そうなんですか。楽しんでください。In Japan, people draw a very clear line between private and official situations. Of course, this kind of distinction exists everywhere. But in Japan, the separation between private and official situation is especially strict. Mixing professional matters with personal matter is called 公私混同。いらっしゃいませ。お、柳じゃん。お前何やってんの？お、元木、お前ここでバイトしてたんだ。そうだよ。ねえ、俺今日5時で上がるんだけど、元木くん。あ、はい。ちょっとこっちに来れる？あ、はい。今行きます。後で LINE するね。元木くん。友達が来たのはわかるんだけど、仕事中はうちの店代表してるんだから、ちゃんと敬語で話さないと。こういうのを公私混同って言うんだよ。あ、はい。わかりました。すいませんでした。次の方、どうぞ。あ、柳。元木、じゃあこの弁当を温めてくれる？あ、かしこまりました。お箸はお付けいたしますか？あ、お願い。お前、急に話し方変わったな。いや、実はさ、今俺店長に怒られたんだよ。あ、そうだったんだ。ごめんごめん。講師 in this 講師混同 means public and private. They are very important concept for understanding how Japanese people choose which form of language to use. There are roughly two types of polite speech. One is casual polite speech, and the other is more official, formal polite speech. First, let me show you the difference. 田中さん、わざわざすいませんね。さあさあ、あっちの席にどうぞ。今、お茶を持ってきますね。田中様、わざわざお越しいただきありがとうございます。あちらの席にお座りください。ただいま、ソ茶をお持ちします。The first one is polite, but still a little casual. Let's call it casual polite speech. And the second one is much more formal. Let's call it formal polite speech. People use casual polite speech in everyday life, speaking to neighbors, strangers, older people, shop clerks, someone who is not so close to them. In other words, it is used in rather more private and personal settings. While people use the formal polite speech in more official or professional settings, like when you speak to customers or clients, or making a speech at a wedding. In other words, you don't need this level of politeness in everyday conversation. To speak formally in Japanese, there are basically three things you need to do. First, use formal expressions and avoid informal expressions. For example, instead of saying めっちゃ、すごく, you say 大変. Instead of すいません, you say 申し訳ございません. Or instead of saying さっき, you say 先ほど. So instead of saying さっきはすいませんね, you say 先ほどは大変申し訳ございませんでした. Second, you use honorific expressions to refer to the other person, their actions, or things related to them. So instead of saying おい田中、これ食え, you say 田中様、こちらをお召し上がりください。召し上がる is the honorific form of 食べる. Because I'm referring to the action of Tanaka, I'm using honorific to describe his action. So I say お召し上がりください instead of 食べてください. The noun 家 is neutral. It's neither very polite or rude. But there is honorific form of 家 which is ご自宅. So instead of saying 田中さんの家, I say 田中さんのご自宅 when I speak formally. ゴジラ様、あちらが田中様のご自宅でございます。どうぞご遠慮なくお召し上がりください。Third, use humble expressions for yourself, your own actions. For example, the humble form of 食べる is いただく. So when you describe your own action of eating, you say いただく instead of 食べる. The reason why people say いただきます at the beginning of each meal is to show that I humbly start having this meal. It is a way to show your appreciation. So basically, to speak very formally, what you need to do is first, use formal language. Second, speak highly of the other person. Third, speak humbly, as if you are their servant. Of course, you are not their servant. It is just a figure of speech. English has something like that too, right? People write yours sincerely at the end of email, right? What yours suggests is that I belong to you, or in other words, I'm always at your service. If you take it literally, it's like saying, I'm yours. I mean, seriously. Okay, so roughly, there are three types of speech: casual speech, casual polite speech, formal polite speech. Let's compare them and see how they differ. ねえ、俺のプリンないんだけどさ、誰か食べた？私のプリンがないんですが、誰か食べましたか？恐れ入ります。私のプリンが見当たらないのですが、どなたか心当たりはないでしょうか？ As you can see, normally, the more formal a sentence becomes, the longer it gets. Another tricky system about the Japanese honorific system is that in formal situations, you're supposed to speak humbly not only about yourself, but also about people in your inner circle, or miuchi. For example, let's say Tanaka-san is your boss. Inside your company, you usually call him Tanaka-san or maybe Tanaka-kacho because he is your superior. When you speak to him, you speak politely. But when you speak to a customer or someone outside the company, the situation changes. At that moment, you're representing your company. Tanaka-san is no longer treated as someone above you. He is treated as part of your side, your inner circle. In other words, he is one of your own people. So when someone from outside the company asks where Tanaka-san is, you would not say 田中さんはいらっしゃいません because いらっしゃる is honorific form of いる. You shouldn't mention him with respect. You should mention him humbly. You don't talk highly of your own people. So instead, you would say something like 田中はただいま席を外しております. First, I mentioned him without any honorifics. I said 田中は and I used the humble form of いる orimasu. This is one of the tricky parts of Japanese polite speech. Honorific and humble language is not only about who is higher or lower inside your group. It also depends on the relationship between my side and the other side. Same in family. You call your older brother 兄さん. But when you mention him in formal occasion, you don't say 私のお兄さんは今東京にいます. You say 私の兄は今東京にいます. 兄 is the humble form of お兄さん. Likewise, you don't say 私のお母さん for your own mom because お母さん is honorific. So instead, you say 私の母. You use the humble form 母. That said, these are all rules of formal speech. You do not need to think much about them in everyday situations. If you come to Japan and speak to your neighbors or friends, these rules can be omitted. In fact, speaking too formally in everyday conversation might sound even annoying because formal speech is long. In casual speech, people say, ねえ、遊びに行かない？ごめん、今日ちょっと用事ある。But if it's formal speech, it becomes like, ねえ、遊びに行かない？せっかくわざわざお誘いいただいたのに、大変恐縮なんですが、ですね、本日はどうしても外せない用事がございまして、誠に残念ではあるのですが、本日ご一緒するのは少々難しい状態でございます。Obviously, this is too much. There's no need to use this kind of very formal speech in everyday conversation. So the question is whether you should use casual speech or casual polite speech. In general, using keigo, polite speech is the safest option. You can use it with anyone, and it minimizes the risk of offending the other person. But that doesn't mean polite language has no downsides. Polite language creates a wall between people and keep them at a certain distance from each other. When someone speaks to you politely, you may feel that you also have to speak to them politely. As a result, both of you become reserved with each other, and it can become harder to close the distance between the two. There is no one size fits all answer, but here's a good rule of thumb. If you are not confident using casual form, you're better off sticking to the polite form. You need a certain level of Japanese to use casual form naturally. If you use casual form in the wrong way, it can sound very rude. For example, adding the question marker ka at the end of plain speech can give a very rude impression. Saying これ食べる sounds friendly. But if you say これ食べるか sounds condescending, sounds very rude. So if you haven't got the hang of these kind of nuances, maybe you should stick to polite form. But if you already have a good command of Japanese, then you can try using casual form with people you want to become friends with. There's no need to use casual form with someone you have no intention of becoming close to. After all, the important thing is reading the atmosphere to see whether you can get along with the person. What many Japanese people do is insert casual speech while still basically speaking politely to see if they can close the distance. If you get a good vibe from the other person, you can gradually loosen the formality and start speaking in casual form. So basically, what you're doing here is the same in any language. You can have a conversation and see if you click with the person. あ、佐藤さん、お疲れ様です。あ、竹中さん、お疲れ様です。佐藤さん、傘忘れたんですか？そうなんですよ。私2つあるんで、1つ貸しますよ。いや、悪いですよ。遠慮しないで。明日出勤の時に返してくれればいいから。あ、わかりました。ありがとうございます。ね、佐藤さんって下の名前何？下の名前ですか？だってうちの会社、佐藤さんって3人いるじゃん。ややこしいから下の名前で呼んだ方がいいかなって。ああ、僕は匠って言います。匠か。じゃあこれからたくさんって呼ぶね。いい？あ、いいですよ。ね、たくさんって何歳？僕は28です。私の1個上じゃん。やばい、私、タメ口使っちゃった。いや、別にいいっすよ。てか、1個上だったらタメ口使ってよ。私もなんか遠慮しなきゃいけなくなっちゃうじゃん。あ、いいよ。でも俺、会社でタメ口使ったことないからさ。俺、後輩と話すときも敬語使ってるからね。私も、でも、敬語ってなんか窮屈じゃない？まあでも俺もう慣れたよ。ねえ、これから暇？うん、特に何もないけど。じゃあさ、これから飲みに行かない？今から？うん、友達になった記念で。え、友達になったの？いや、タメ口で話せる仲になったら、そりゃ友達じゃん。さあさあ、行こう行こう。